We do have breaking news. Just moments ago, the Federal Appeals Court does not allow Donald Trump to remove Lisa Cook from her post. I'll just read from the order. Upon consideration of the emergency motion for stay pending appeal and administrative stay, the oppositions thereto, and the reply, the motion for leave to participate as amicus curiae filed by the Separation of Powers Clinic and the Lodge. Yes. This is the order. The motions for leave to participate as amicus curiae be granted. The clerk is directed to file the amicus briefs. They go down. This is Judge Childs, Circuit Judge Garcia, joined by Judge Childs. They note about that Trump said he found cause. They talk about how the district court issued its preliminary injunction, and then they go on to underscore that, again, Donald Trump will not be able to remove her. As we'll comb through this a little more, can you just give us your hot take on this?
This is a movie we've seen before many times, actually, right? Trump tries to fire an independent person. The district court says, no, you can't do that. The appeals court says the district court got this right. No, you can't do that. The next step here is the administration presumably is going to rush to the Supreme Court, say we have an emergency. Can you put a stay on this order? And what the Supreme Court does is anyone's guess, to my mind. They put in so many stays that they shouldn't have put in place to help the Trump administration that it would not surprise me if they put in a stay here as well. Hopefully they know that they should not do that. They seem to have recognized that the Fed would be a particularly problematic third rail for them to touch. But that is, I think, where we're headed here. We'll see what the administration does.
And this means tomorrow, when the Fed starts meeting about what to do about interest rates, Lisa Cook will be there, and presumably this guy from the White House will also be there, and we will see if President Trump continues to bully or figure out a way to push more of that.
A key line from this court.
When you say we will see that, how? How will we see that?
We might see it.
When will it be obvious to us?
Well, there's always the 2 a.m. Trump social posts about some new allegation. But I think that's the question of how the Fed decides about whether to cut rates and how much. I think many people are just no longer assuming that it is not partially driven by politics. And the era of Fed independence, I think, is over now.
Michael,
looks like she will have company, right?
Oh, yes. We can confirm that Myron has been confirmed by the Senate while this show has been happening. Key line from the order, given that Cook has a property interest in her position, she is entitled to some kind of process before removal. The court is saying in this order, you just cannot dismiss people by social media posts. You have to have a process. And they are siding with Lisa Cook, saying she deserves that process, and she is now going to get it.
Well, let's see what kind of process they create.
Yeah, because some kind of is in quotes from the judges themselves.
They're not saying an evidentiary hearing. They're saying some process.
Some process.
And I think that might be an invitation for some.
Elucidate that. What could that look like?
Well, I don't know. I hate to speculate based on an opinion I haven't read just yet. But I don't know. An internal process could look like something like an internal sort of administrative tribunal, not an actual tribunal, but present some allegations. You get an opportunity to respond. There's sort of some internal referee, but I don't know what a fair process would look like in this administration, given everything that they've done so far. I mean, they've already made clear that they're not particularly interested in a fair process. They're interested in a political outcome.
I want to go back to Simone's core argument, though, which is the only action we have seen is when someone actually makes the choice to stand up, to push back, and to fight, even if that comes at great personal expense, even if that creates personal exhaustion.
And that's been the tale of the tape for the very few law firms that push back, the very few individuals in the federal government that have pushed back, the universities that have pushed back. There is value in standing your ground on principle, on the principle that there is a process, there's a legitimate legal process, there are economic realities, all these things that flow into the conversation for people. So I'm with you at the end of the day, Ankush, because I think that this Supreme Court has been so compromised via its other opinions. I don't see how now it just sort of swings around and suddenly finds the value of the rule of law and will say, oh, we'll stay simply because we want some other process to happen. And that's the problem we have here. And so here we are.
And look at what the Federal Reserve Board weighed in the court, that they have no opinion on whether Lisa Cook was illegally removed or not. And that's just another example of people just willing to give in.
I mean, literally, Jerome Powell's done a very good job at defending himself in the wake of exerting the president trying to exert authority over himself, but he did not defend his fellow governors.
Well, as I just said, this hour will not be what Donald Trump wants it to be. It will not be a discussion of Donald Trump's pathological lie that liberals are to blame for the murder of Charlie Cook. Donald Trump knows that's a lie, and he is pushing that lie in the hope that programs like this will be filled with anguished complaint about this Trump mass libel of half of America. Donald Trump is the only president of the United States who has ever blamed a murder on millions of voters who did not vote for him. Donald Trump knows that the 22-year-old Utah man accused of the murder grew up in a family of registered Republican parents who Donald Trump has now praised repeatedly. Today, Donald Trump said that the accused murderer's parents did everything right. Parents who can think, of course, that they've done everything right are not parents I've met. Parents whose kids end up facing murder charges surely can wonder from time to time what they might have gotten wrong. And so Donald Trump insults the intelligence of the entire country, including his own supporters, when he launches this mass libel of half the country. The 20-year-old man in Pennsylvania who shot at Donald Trump was a registered Republican. And the 22-year-old Utah man accused of murdering Charlie Cook has never voted. The single most murderous American political assassin was a registered Republican. And he is the only American political assassin who murdered more than one person. Timothy McVeigh was a veteran of the United States Army who, at 26 years old, in an instant, murdered 168 people in the federal building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, in 1995. Registered Republican Timothy McVeigh attacked the federal building specifically to assassinate federal workers for his twisted right-wing political reasons. Registered Republican Timothy McVeigh came to hate the government in whose army he served. Timothy McVeigh murdered 19 children in the daycare center of that federal building in an instant by blowing up that building with a truck bomb. Registered Republican Timothy McVeigh's assassination target that day was all the federal workers in that building, and he didn't care who else would have to die in the process. That's how far Timothy McVeigh's insane right-wing ideology drove him. And Donald Trump had nothing to say about that. In 1995, Donald Trump could pick up the phone and get himself quoted in the New York tabloid newspapers whenever he wanted to. He could get himself booked on TV chat shows and say whatever he wanted to say. He could take out full-page ads in the New York Times and condemn people, as he had already done at that time, demanding the death penalty. In one case, for people who he wrongly believed were guilty of raping a woman in Central Park. There was no full-page ad by Donald Trump about Timothy McVeigh. Donald Trump didn't blame the Republican Party for what Timothy McVeigh did. No one blamed Republicans for what Timothy McVeigh did. There was no internet to blame yet, no social media to blame for poisoning Timothy McVeigh's mind. And it never crossed any politician's mind to blame millions of people who never met Timothy McVeigh. That is Donald Trump's uniquely perverse contribution to the aftermath of a public murder. What Donald Trump wants is agreement from his supporters and outrage from the millions of people he is libelously accusing of inciting murder. Because that means that we will not be covering the very bad news that continues to mount for Donald Trump, including headlines like this one. in today's Wall Street Journal, right there, Putin, Netanyahu march on with Trump on the sidelines. That is a very, very important headline for the world and a very bad headline for Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin and Benjamin Netanyahu proving every day how irrelevant Donald Trump is to their calculations about what they will do next. Remember Donald Trump's pointless trip to Alaska to welcome Vladimir Putin into the United States? Donald Trump said he would give Vladimir Putin 2 weeks after that to reach a peace agreement with Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin has continued his savage attacks on Ukraine and humiliated Donald Trump even more than he was before by sending Russian drones into NATO territory in Poland. And Donald Trump says nothing. Donald Trump just says libelous things about other people being to blame for the murder of Charlie Kirk. Donald Trump just wants to get half the country outraged at the other half of this country. And Donald Trump doesn't want anyone in this country to be outraged at Vladimir Putin. The other bad news for Donald Trump includes a federal court tonight finding his attempt to fire a member of the Federal Reserve Board to be completely and obviously illegal. And so Lisa Cook will show up for tomorrow's meeting at the Federal Reserve because she's still a member and she knows that. And Donald Trump really doesn't want you to know what's in the emails in the Epstein files. Our first guest tonight has been studying the emails in the Epstein files. Jason Leopold at Bloomberg reports the emails, part of a cache of more than 18,000 obtained by Bloomberg News, show that Maxwell and Epstein were closer in many respects than either publicly admitted. Maxwell opened at least one foreign bank account using one of his addresses, was a named director on one of Epstein's main revenue-generating companies, and traded stock in a company they were both invested in, details that haven't been previously reported. The details in these emails show Ghislaine Maxwell lied to federal agents, which is the criminal equivalent of perjury when Donald Trump's former criminal defense lawyer, now Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, went to Florida last month to have a friendly chat with Ghislaine Maxwell. On the recorded portion of their conversation, and we don't know how much was said when the recording wasn't on, but on the recorded portion of the conversation, which has been made public, Todd Blanche warned Ghislaine Maxwell that it would be a crime for her to lie to them in that conversation, but she did lie to them anyway. And Donald Trump doesn't want you to know that. Donald Trump did her the immediate favor of moving her to an easy, relaxed camp from the federal prison that she was in. And so Donald Trump doesn't want you to see the evidence of her perjury in these emails tonight that Bloomberg has obtained. Donald Trump wants to think about the possibility of releasing her from prison someday, and so he doesn't want any of this information out there. And Donald Trump is not going to prosecute her for the perjury that she committed in her conversation with Todd Blanche. And it is Donald Trump who decides who gets prosecuted by the Trump Justice Department. Bloomberg reports that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, quote, discussed undergoing a shared fertility procedure long after Maxwell claims she largely disassociated from him. They corresponded about discrediting women who raised allegations against them, including in one exchange where Maxwell said she planned to circulate compromising information on one of Epstein's sexual abuse victims. Maxwell has maintained she was kept in the dark about details of Epstein's initial sexual abuse case in the mid-2000s, yet the emails demonstrate her deep knowledge of the legal jeopardy he faced and show how she helped him strategize over even the most consequential details. Ghislaine Maxwell advised Jeffrey Epstein on the plea deal that he made in 2008 that instead of imprisoning Jeffrey Epstein as a sex trafficker and raper of children, allowed Jeffrey Epstein to continue to roam free and rape more children. Bloomberg reports Epstein wrote to Maxwell on May 23, 2008, Which one do you prefer, lewd and lascivious conduct or procuring minors for prostitution? At the time, he and his star-studded team of defense lawyers were closing in on a generous plea deal with federal and state officials in Florida, and Epstein was trying to negotiate the state charges to which he'd pleaded guilty. Maxwell's response was matter of fact. I suppose lewd and lascivious conduct. I would prefer lewd and lascivious conduct with a prostitute, if possible. That is the sex trafficking convicted criminal Ghislaine Maxwell advising Jeffrey Epstein about how to deal with his first round of criminal charges before she herself was convicted of sex trafficking and sentenced to 20 years in prison, which Donald Trump has now made a much lighter sentence by moving her to a much more pleasant surrounding and no doubt planning to release her from prison as a reward after the next presidential election, when Donald Trump's pardon spree will surely be something to behold. The federal prosecutor who knows more about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell than any other prosecutor in history was fired by Donald Trump and his Justice Department. Today, that fired prosecutor, Maureen Comey, sued Donald Trump for the illegal firing, saying in her lawsuits against Donald Trump, defendants have not provided any explanation whatsoever for terminating Ms. Comey. In truth, there is no legitimate explanation. Rather, defendants fired Ms. Comey solely or substantially because her father is former FBI Director James Comey, or because of her perceived political affiliation and beliefs, or both. The politically motivated termination of Ms. Comey, ostensibly under Article 2 of the Constitution, upends bedrock principles of our democracy and justice system. In her lawsuit, Maureen Comey said she was asked to join the prosecution team of a major public corruption case on July 15th. So obviously, she was a prosecutor in good standing in the Justice Department on July 15th, but the next day, July 16th, she was fired. And the day after that, July 17th, the Wall Street Journal broke the story about the Epstein birthday book that includes a birthday letter from Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein with Donald Trump's signature on the letter. And it appears to be exactly the same one-word Donald signature that I got on the one note that I ever received from Donald Trump in 2016. Today, more than 20 Epstein and Maxwell survivors, including many who spoke publicly at the Capitol 2 weeks ago, are urging members of the Republican Women's Caucus to, quote, stand up against abuse of power and to take action to end the silence and speculation. In a letter obtained by ABC News to the caucus chairs, Republican Congresswoman Kat Cammack and Senator Katie Britt, the survivors requested a meeting with the Republican Women's Caucus. Their letter to the Republican women says, we are mothers, daughters, sisters, friends, and wives. We have sought justice for decades to no avail. We have denied the basic rights that should be afforded to every American citizen time and time again. The fact that it took this long for anyone to care about us is a true American tragedy. We stand together in pain and resilience, and we are asking for your help. We have a right to feel safe in this country. We have a right to know why a serial sexual predator was treated with more humanity than we have ever experienced from our own government. Remind us that America is a country that we thought it was when we were little girls, before we were let down repeatedly by our own government.
We can call it a shared national interest, peace in our time. It is why, in the aftermath of a conservative activist's shocking murder, just about every elected leader, current and former, called for and preached calm. President Bill Clinton encouraged introspection and a redoubling of efforts to engage in peaceful debate. His successor, President George W. Bush, insisted, quote, violence and vitriol be purged from the public square, emphasizing this, quote, members of other political parties are not our enemies, they are our fellow citizens. President Barack Obama suggested, quote, "This kind of despicable violence has no place in our democracy." It is a sentiment that was reflected by President Joe Biden as well, who added, quote, "It must end now." Such messages extended beyond former commanders-in-chief. House Speaker, Republican Mike Johnson, said he wanted lawmakers to help, quote, "turn the temperature down." Alabama Senator Republican Katie Britt asserted, quote, "The time for unity and peace in our nation is now," end quote. And Spencer Cox, the Republican governor of Utah, the state where Charlie Kirk was murdered, made clear to Americans that, quote, "At some point we have to find an off-ramp or it's going to get much, much worse," end quote. And then, really since Wednesday, there's been Donald Trump, who's been given opportunities time and time again over these past few days to reflect any one of those messages calling for peace and calm. Opportunities he has seemed to reject completely.
For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today.
The radicals on the left are the problem, and they're vicious and they're horrible.
And when you look at the agitators, you look at the scum that speaks so badly of our country, the American flag burnings all over the place, that's the left, that's not the right.
Donald Trump is charting a new path for America, setting a new standard for that office and for political leadership more broadly, one that has been received, one that's been heard loud and clear among huge swaths of Donald Trump's sizable base of support. Steve Bannon, for instance, has suggested our country is, quote, "already at war." Members of Trump's cabinet, along with his two sons, have fanned the flames in appearances they have made on right-wing media. That vocal undercurrent of blame and revenge is the subject of a New York Times piece of reporting by Peter Baker. He describes Donald Trump's reaction this way, quote, "Trump has long made clear that coming together is not the mission of his presidency. In an era of deep polarization in American society, he rarely talks about healing. While other presidents have typically tried to lower the temperature in moments of national crisis, Mr. Trump turns up the flames. He does not subscribe to the traditional notion of being a president for all the people. He acts as president of Red America and the people who agree with him, while those who do not are portrayed as enemies and traitors deserving payback," end quote. The vital question now, as we bear witness to the words being uttered by our current and our only president, our only commander-in-chief, and other powerful people who've come before him, is what happens next as our country comes to terms with what feels like a new normal of political violence. What do the president's words mean? Not just for the American people, but for our standing in the world, for the soul of our nation, if you will. It's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters in France. New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush is back. Also joining us, former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the Justice Department, MSNBC legal analyst Mary McCord is here, and MSNBC senior White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard joins us from the White House. I want to do one thing with you, Vaughn, first. I want to show you what Governor Josh Shapiro said about the comment from Donald Trump that I played, and you of all people know how careful I am about amplifying some of Donald Trump's most controversial messages. But Governor Shapiro responded to the word scum, and I just want to read you what he said. He subtweeted this line from Donald Trump that, quote, "the problem's on the left, it's not on the right," some people like to say. He goes on to call the left scum. Of that, Governor Shapiro said this, quote, "No one party is immune from political violence. My family and I can attest to that. Using the rhetoric of rage and calling some of our fellow Americans, quote, scum, no matter how profound our differences, only creates more division and makes it harder to heal. We are at an inflection point in America. Violence transcends party lines, and the way to address it and have true peaceful debate is for leaders to speak and act with moral clarity. That needs to start with the president." What are you seeing from the president in your reporting, Vaughn?
I think that what we're seeing from President Trump is a reaction to this that is not like that of previous leaders before him, whether it be Josh Shapiro, whether it be the Republican governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, telling young Americans to reject the rage that may be instigated from this. If you look at Steve Bannon, who, again, earlier today, pushed back against Spencer Cox's handling of this, saying to reject the idea that everybody should have a big hug, but instead that this malignant problem on the left needs to be rooted out, was echoed by J.D. Vance today, the vice president, saying that this is not a both sides problem. He also used the word malignant to describe the problem that he says is on the left. And I say that the way that President Trump and his cabinet officials, including the Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, are responding to this doesn't match that of even if you go back to 2017, Steve Scalise, who was shot there on that ballpark ahead of the congressional baseball game. 4 months after that, he went onto the floor of the U.S. House and he said, quote, well, some people might focus on a tragic event and an evil act. To me, all I remember are the thousands of acts of kindness and love and warmth that came out of this. If you go back to 2011, after Gabby Giffords was shot in Tucson and Christina Taylor Greene and 5 others were killed by that shooter down in Tucson, President Obama of the same party went down to Tucson and made the very specific statement that, quote, we may ask ourselves if we've shown enough kindness and generosity and compassion to the people in our lives. The examples go on. You can go back to generations past. And what is being presented by this president and his top cabinet officials, however, particularly in the last 72 hours, is a plan to go out and use the federal government and specifically the executive branch in still ways that are unclear here to us now as a means of going and rooting out what they say is a problem specifically on the left.
It is day 239 of the second Trump administration, and this evening we are tracking important developments after the murder of Charlie Kirk. Today, Vice President J.D. Vance hosted Kirk's podcast, bringing several members of the administration on as a tribute. And the president is expected to attend Kirk's memorial in Arizona this coming Sunday. 22-year-old Tyler Robinson has been arrested for allegedly shooting and killing the conservative influencer last week. Formal charges against Robinson are expected to come tomorrow. My colleague Morgan Chesky has those details.
Tonight, a chilling portrait emerging of the suspect police say assassinated Charlie Kirk. The Washington Post reports, citing 2 people familiar and a screenshot. He appeared to confess in an online group chat before turning himself in, writing, "Hey guys, I have bad news for you all. It was me at UVU yesterday. I'm sorry for all of this." The FBI director revealing 2 pieces of evidence had the suspect's DNA, a towel wrapped around the murder weapon, and a screwdriver found on the roof, saying the suspect had a hatred of Kirk.
His family has collectively told investigators that he subscribed to left-wing ideology, and he had a text message exchange, he the suspect, with another individual, in which he claimed that he had an opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk and he was going to do it because of his hatred for what Charlie stood for.
The FBI now investigating if anyone had information before the shooting and did not tell authorities. President Trump was asked if the suspect worked alone.
I don't know. I mean, I can tell you he didn't work alone on the internet because it seems that he became radicalized on the internet.
Here at Utah County Jail, authorities say that Tyler Robinson is now on a special watch status, meaning even closer supervision, adding he'll stay there until passing a mental health evaluation.
The FBI saying they're also speaking to his roommate, who authorities say he was romantically involved with.
We can confirm that that roommate is a boyfriend who is transitioning from male to female, so we know that piece. I will say that that person has been very cooperative with authorities.
While the arrow symbols on one of the suspect's alleged inscriptions on unfired rounds, which follows the message, "Hey fascist, catch," may be related to controller moves to drop bombs in the video game Helldivers 2.
With that, let's get smarter with the help of our leadoff panel tonight. Peter Baker joins us, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Philip Bump is here, former Washington Post columnist, and McKay Coppins is a staff writer at The Atlantic. All right, Peter, this awful crime exposed just how deep the political divide runs in our country. Why has this hit home so deeply and revealed so much?
Well, look, Charlie Kirk was a particularly popular figure on the right, particularly popular among young people who turned out in large numbers to see him. I think to see an assassination in such a public way on a college campus with the whole idea is a free and open exchange of ideas, thousands of people there watching it in front of them. It's a particularly horrific moment, a particularly horrific scene. It's also, I think, struck a nerve because a lot of people on the right feel that they have been targeted. The president, of course, himself was the target of 2 assassination attempts last year. When you listen to the people in the White House talk about this, they talk about it very personally. They knew Charlie Kirk. They considered him a friend. The president, even compared him to being like another son. J.D. Vance had tied himself very closely to Charlie Kirk. So this has been a personal thing for them. But I think it also has been a moment that's crystallized this divide that you're talking about, because I think that they have in the White House, made clear that they see this as a one-sided problem. This is a problem of left-wing violence.
On what grounds are they saying that, seeing that, yes, unfortunately, our president experienced not 1 but 2 assassination attempts, but prior to Charlie Kirk, we lost a Minnesota lawmaker, her husband, and another lawmaker in that same state?
Absolutely, absolutely, and of course, Josh Shapiro, the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, his house was put on fire. Obviously, Paul Pelosi, the husband of Nancy Pelosi, was attacked viciously, and of course, January 6th violence. Where the president of the United States himself, addressed a mob of supporters that then went and ransacked the Capitol. So clearly, if you look at the record of just the last few years, there's plenty of violence to go around the political spectrum. But they have decided this is a moment to focus on left-wing violence. Now, the question, of course, that a lot of people on the left are asking is that a predicate for a political repression? The talk out of the White House seems ominous to people who are not seeing words of calm, but words of war. Steve Bannon told me over the weekend the left has declared war on America, and Trump is a wartime president.
Well, let's talk about other words that came out of the White House today. J.D. Vance, as I just said, hosted Charlie Kirk's podcast at the White House, from the White House, and sort of previewed what the administration is thinking about in the wake of this assassination. And he also urged people, I want to lay this out for our audience. He urged people who are listening to notify their employers if they see posts appearing to mock Kirk or celebrate his death. If any of their fellow employees did so, that people should report it to their boss or their HR departments. And we've already seen firings. Philip, what do you think about this? Especially given that what Charlie Kirk has been most honored for is freedom of speech.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole separate discussion. The extent to which that captures what it was that he was.
But I'm just
to do.
saying,
But
even
I
those who say they don't support Charlie Kirk's political views, but they did support, his right to freedom of speech.
Sure, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It is impossible to escape the hypocrisy of the Republican Party that spent years back into Donald Trump's first term in office claiming that social media was out to get them, that conservatives were the subject of these often secret and hard to articulate efforts to try and suppress their speech, how they were going to be the free speech warriors. We saw a number of Republican legislators advocate for and pass legislation that was focused ostensibly on free speech, that now they are the ones that are embracing this idea, this, what can very easily be called cancel culture. What Adam Serwer, writing for The Atlantic last year, pointed out was sort of creating this snitch state, was what he described it as, and using people who are angry and who are partisan and who are polarized to do the work that the government shouldn't do, which is, suppressing speech, by calling out people. We heard Vance say that today. You should be out there. You guys should be the ones policing this and talking to employers and getting people in trouble, which is basically extending the arm of the state to some extent by calling for that to happen. And it is a remarkable deviation from the rhetoric that they've been doing. I mean, I don't know that rhetoric was ever entirely sincere, but it's staggering to see the shift that's occurred just in the past.
But just think back to when Mark Zuckerberg sort of took his turn and moved further to the right. One of his biggest complaints was how the Biden administration pushed them on the content they were allowed to have on their platforms, how they were allowed to speak about vaccines, and that we needed to be advocates for freedom of speech. And now look where we are. McKay, what do you make of what we heard from the VP, from other administration officials today, and even in the last few days, and sort of where this administration is headed?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it's clear that the administration is very upset. These figures in the administration are very upset about this murder, understandably so. Some also sense a political opportunity here to get as much out of this tragedy as possible in terms of punishing their enemies. And I mean, look, I should say, I do think it's really ghoulish that some people responded to this murder by celebrating it or mocking him, and that did happen. But it's also the case that to have the Vice President of the United States telling his supporters, number in the many millions, that they should be actively rooting out people who are saying negative things online or going too far in their criticism according to what standard we don't know, and reporting them to their employers, that's not, that's new terrain that we're in, right?
Okay,
I
but
would also just rephrase.
Call me naive, but what about the political opportunity to bring the country together?
And you do see some Republicans, for example, like Utah Governor Spencer Cox, trying to seize that opportunity, right? To say that, look, this should be a wake-up call for all of us, regardless of party, regardless of political affiliation, that we have to pull our country back from the brink, that we are in a very dangerous spiral. And I will say that I actually think a lot of Trump supporters are responding to that rhetoric. We're going to focus on the loudest voices on both sides, the angriest voices on both sides. And this is a very angry moment in our politics. But I have also seen a lot of people responding to what Spencer Cox and people like him are saying. It's just unfortunate that it doesn't appear that the people at the very highest levels of our government seem especially focused on that project right now.
Peter, what else are we missing? What are we in store for here?
Yeah, I think to McKay's point, is exactly right. There have always been loud voices in American politics that say, divisive things, right? But typically you don't hear them from the White House. Typically what you hear from the White House, Republican or Democrat, are presidents in moment of crisis trying to calm things down, calm the waters, lower the temperature, all those cliches. And instead here you've got a president who likes to raise the temperature, who in fact, increases the flames. He's talked about the radical left lunatics. And the question is, okay, well, what does he mean with that, when he says that? Remember last year during the campaign, he talked about the enemy from within. That we need to go after the enemy from within. They are the real threat to America, not Russia or China. Well, who is he talking about here? When he talks about radical left lunatics, is he talking about people who actually pick up a gun and commit violence? That would be one thing. A lot of people would agree with that, obviously, that people like that need to be pursued. But they're talking about going after organizations. And in the context of some of this discussion, he has mentioned, for instance, George Soros of the Open Society forum, and one of the most favorite targets of the right. Well, what does that mean? How is George Soros responsible for this lone gunman in Utah who seems to have no connection to any other organization? Any law enforcement authorities have told us about it so far, right? And the question then becomes, what are you defining? And Philip talked about this too. How do you define what you consider to be acceptable or not? What are you saying is what organization is responsible for violence, and in what way, and what would you do to them if you did decide that they were?